People were trying to get me to fight Beneil Dariush. Here, we'll bring this video up quick. Beneil Dariush, in his last fight, said, this is dedicated to everybody infected with Marxist ideology, like an anti-Marxist thing. And then he went on Candace Owens' show, which is like definitely something we should react to later, or I'll even react to this now. But people were asking me to fight this guy. I'm like, Beneil Dariush is like the third-ranked lightweight in the world. Do you know how easily Beneil Dariush would knock me out? It's like, I'm not invincible. Like, I can't just beat up every single person who says something bad about socialism. Let's look at Beneil Dariush's MMA record here. Let's look at this person that people want me to knock out, even though I'm 0-0 in MMA with almost no training. Beneil Dariush is 21-4. He's ranked 3rd or 4th in the UFC. And look at all these people. He KO'd Scott Holtzman with a spinning back fist. He KO'd Drakkar Klose when he was losing, knocked the dude out. Plus, he has submissions in there. So this guy can strike. He can do jiu-jitsu. And, like, the only advantage I would have, even if it was an advantage, would be wrestling. Right? I would maybe be able to take him down once before he submitted me.
Respectively, for some comments that you made after a fight. And I actually want to run that clip because it was sort of amazing. Watch it.
I want to thank my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. That's number one. Hey, calm down, calm down. Number two, I want to dedicate this fight to all the people who've been hurt by Marxist ideologies. There are millions of you, and I know it. And it's just a fight. I know it's not much, but I want you to know that I love you, and I understand the pain.
That's incredible.
That is incredible, Candace. You're so smart. I want someone next time like Weili Zhang, who was the former UFC flyweight champion from China, be like, I would like to dedicate this fight to all the victims of U.S. imperialism. I know it's just a fight, and I know it's not much, but I want to dedicate this to all the people who have been massacred by drone strikes and all the Palestinian children who have had missiles and rockets launched at them, funded by the U.S. government and funded by capitalist imperialism. All the victims of World War I. All the people who were pulled into that deadly imperialist war. Like, soon we will destroy capitalism and it will stop murdering people. It's so funny that it's like, I wanna dedicate this fight to all the people affected by Marxist ideology. Like all the 1.4 billion people in China living under communism who have had their standard of living raised completely. It's like, why are you not apologizing to the Chinese people who the British purposefully got addicted to opium so they could make them better slaves, right? That's what communism kicked out of the country. Why aren't you worried about that, Beneil Dariush? Why are you only worried about people who die from Marxism? Why aren't you worried about people who die from capitalist imperialism? Also, how does Marxism, a system of thought, kill people? Don't you mean militaries and governments killing people? Shout out Marxism. Yeah, I agree. Shout out Marxism. All right.
That is incredible. What possessed you to, thank you, Jesus Christ, of course. What possessed you to then dedicate it to, and especially right now with what's going on in Cuba, to the millions of people that are suffering under Marxist regimes?
Well, there's a couple of things. The catalyst to it was Thug Rose. I don't know if you were familiar with her. Mm-hmm. She came out. She just became champion again. She fought Weili Zhang, and she came out and said, "Better dead than red."
Oh, sorry. I forgot to switch the camera back so you could see Beneil Dariush talking. But here, this is what he looks like. And here's where Candace is sitting. But yeah, Thug Rose came out and she was fighting a Chinese fighter, Weili Zhang, and she made it political, and continued this sort of red scare that's going on with China, right? This sort of new Cold War that's being propagated against China has now spilled into sports, to where Rose said better dead than red, saying that, she wants to beat Weili Zhang simply because Weili Zhang is one of 1.4 billion people who live in China. And this is gross. It's not gross to question the political ideology, but it's like, one, if you really care about people who are suffering under Marxist regimes, why is your solution to beat up one of their fighters and beat up someone from their working class who has made their way into being a successful athlete, and then be like, oh, better dead than red? Like, how your solution is to beat up their people to fix their government? Like, that's such a great example of the American mindset, right? Oh, better dead than red. We better beat up their working class people and turn Americans against their entire country because I don't like communism and I care so much about the people who are dying under communism. Like, you guys are ridiculous. And of course that's how it started, right? Beneil Dariush, of course he says that, because this new Cold War is happening with China, right? More and more the U.S. media saying this is what's going on in China, the most horrible human rights abuses ever. Ignore the fact that, they're economically successful and they're bringing people out of poverty at an incredible rate. Ignore what China looked like before the revolution as a place where that the Western powers were constantly trying to destroy. Forget about all that. Just look at China as evil. Marxism is evil. You need to save people infected with Marxist ideologies, even if that means killing every single one of them.
Rose. I don't know if you were familiar with her. She came out. She just became champion again. She fought Wei Zhang, and she came out and said, "Better dead than red." And her family's, I believe, it was Lithuanian, and that was their slogan: "Better dead than red." And she got a terrible backlash, and I just couldn't understand it. Like, she's not saying anything crazy. You don't want communism. You don't want this socialism. This is what destroys countries and lives. So.
And if Wei Zhang, someone whose life is not destroyed, right? Wei Zhang, the person Rose Namajunas was fighting, who is one of the 1.4 billion members of China, whose only response to Thug Rose was come visit the country for yourself, right? If she says that she wants communism, that actually communism has worked well for this country, nope. Her opinion doesn't count, right? What Rose said is good. Full stop. Because that is the dominant hegemonic idea in the U.S. What she's saying is normal. What she's saying is good. Completely disregard Wei Zhang, this person who actually lives under communism. We need to listen to Rose Namajunas, someone who's never lived outside of the United States. Well, she probably lived in Lithuania. I know she's Lithuanian, but someone based in the United States, right? The country robbing the global South of their resources and labor. And that's part of what's so arrogant about it. And obviously, the average person doesn't know that. The average person doesn't know the impact of U.S. imperialism. But it's like, you're spending all this time bashing China, a country who kicked out the imperialists and have built a stable society. And it's like, the West purposefully was getting their people addicted to opium to use them as slaves. And then you're like, nobody wants communism. It's like, well, nobody wants to be addicted to opium by the U.S. so the U.S. can rob them. Beneil, I know it seems like that's good to you because you live in Texas, which he does. But to the people of China, yeah, they actually do want communism because it's better than being colonized. So you can make a ton of money fighting people in a cage, which I don't mean to hate on the UFC fighters because their average pay is $45,000 a year, which is less than the average American. So they're getting paid less than the average American to get brain damage fighting in a cage for our entertainment. So shout out to the UFC. And Beneil, maybe you should be more worried about that than you are about China, my friend.
I saw how the media played it. They churned in. They said, like, communism, it's not even an issue in America, things like that. And they kind of put a lot of pressure on her. And I actually felt bad for her. I was like, she should be able to say that as much as she wants, and pretty much everybody should. So with that being said, I said I was just going to say the same thing she said. But the issue is, it's the way they play with words. So you say communism, they say, well, we're not really talking about communism. We're talking about socialism. And you say socialism, they say, well.
Dog, you just said you're talking about China. China does not say that. China is run by the Communist Party, and there are 100 million members of the Communist Party. You're like, oh, these people are playing with the words. It's not real socialism. He's trying to argue against like Bernie Sanders and AOC, who actually aren't real socialists. Then why did you just bring up China? China is communist. China does not say, oh, we're not real communism. They say we are a communist country, and Western communists try and say they're not. These people are so confused. And what's hilarious is that this is considered a news show. Like, people turn on Candace Owens and they're like, time to get informed. And this guy's just saying nonsense. Like, that's obviously untrue. Like, oh yeah, the Chinese Communist Party claims they're not real communism. What are you talking about? I'm sure Beneil Dariush has read Xi Jinping's Governance of China front to cover, and that's how he formed these opinions.
It's not that kind of socialism, it's this. And I just said, Marxism, it covers it all. The only difference between these is one of them is a slower poison that's going to kill you later on, and one of them just kills you fast. The other one kills you faster. So I think we got to make sure we start calling it just Marxism, and it's all one. You don't get to say, no, it's this. You don't get to say, it's all the same thing.
Right,
I think we just need to start inventing definitions, right? And because I don't like working people having anything, right? I think we should call all socialism Marxism, right? Don't read what Marx said, right? Don't actually read Marx before you decide what Marxism is. Just label everything you don't like as Marxism. We really need to start doing this. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Beneil. That's genius.
Karl Marx wrote a book, and it's his Marxist ideology. He was talking about taking a country that was capitalist, using socialism as a transitory state, and turning it into a communist state. And people don't understand those steps. And you are so correct that if you start with talking about Marxism, the ideology, right? And
people don't understand those steps, says Candace Owens. People don't understand the Marxist steps. Actually, Marx was advocating for social democracy, which could transition us to communism. It's funny because you see that Candace has actually been kind of trained up, to kind of learn what Marxism is a bit. She's talking about the transitionary state between socialism and communism. But what that's in response to is, again, like Bernie Sanders. They're like, oh, the social democrats are just the same as Marxists. They just want a slower transition to communism. It's like, no, Marx said the workers need to have a revolutionary movement, take power of the government, and then use that to transition into socialism, out of capitalism, into communism. It's not, and the ideas of the social democrats and the reformists and Edward Bernstein and John Maynard Keynes was, we're going to convince the bourgeoisie to slowly transition to socialism, which is what they're describing here. Obviously, their ideas are confused, which is like, what, even if you're a really dumb conservative, you should want someone explaining Marxism to you who actually understands what it is, right? These people have no idea what Marxism even is. They've never opened Marx, and now they're willing to go on this TV show or go on live television and act like they're experts who you should listen to. I mean, it's hilarious, but this is America, right? This is the kind of people, the kind of content that is backed by corporations. Candace Owens has been propped up by corporate America to purposefully distort the meaning of Marxism as much as possible. So they love this stuff. They love just confidently saying misinformation about Marx, right? And of course, they're never going to take the time to actually read Marx, and if they did, they'd probably still misrepresent him anyways.
And the thought processes, the institutions that are practicing this Marxist ideology, people might have a better grasp of what it is we're talking about. Interesting that you say that, she's from Lithuania, because there is this thing that the West, we have been blessed for so long that we don't know what socialism is, we don't know what Marxism is, and people come here from the East and they're like, are you crazy? Do you understand the cancer that we are talking about? You're from Iran. Yep. And has that sort of been something that has sort of tethered you to, All
right. Oh, sorry. I forgot to mute my microphone. This should be interesting. I don't know if y'all heard what she said, because there was probably some lag. Oh, shoot. There's someone being annoying in the chat. Let me mute and put them on timeout. Sorry, person, if you didn't mean to be annoying, but you're kind of spamming us. So, yeah, you hear her say, oh, you're from Iran. Iran's not communist. Iran, and she's... Okay, this is going to be perfect. He said, you're from Iran. Iran's not communist. Iran's Communist Party backed a nationalist candidate in 1950 named Mohammad Mossadegh, who took power in 1952, I believe, and nationalized the British oil companies and started reinvesting them in the Iranian people. The U.S. quickly did a coup in 1953 and overthrew Mossadegh and replaced him with a monarchical Shah. Right, and then that led to the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which was an anti-Western, anti-imperialist revolution, get out of our country United States revolution, but not by any means a communist revolution, right? It was the religious clergy essentially became sort of the bourgeoisie, but, 70% of their economy is state-owned. It's largely controlled by the state, which means Western corporations aren't able to pillage Iran, which is why the Western Empire is constantly trying to destroy Iran, why we have so many sanctions on Iran right now, why we've been threatening war with Iran for 20 years, why we drone struck Iran's general. So they're not communism. And then you hear Candace also like, oh, we're so blessed in the West, we have it so good, we don't understand what socialism is like. No, we don't understand that all our goodness and our abundance of wealth in the West has been stolen from these countries, has been ripped from countries in the global South. Their resources have been ripped for them, and when they try and control the sectors of economic power, the CIA, the U.S. Special Forces, the military, go and overthrow these countries. So she's talking about how blessed we are in the West and how countries in the East, how naive we are to the plight of people in the East. Meanwhile, the U.S. is destroying people's countries in the East. And also, the Communist Party has like a 94% approval rating in China. As you saw with Weili Zhang saying, come visit China, come see it for yourself, you crazy Americans who are red baiting me, come see what it's actually like. And they're like, no, don't do that. Just label it as evil authoritarian communism, just like Iran, which is not a communist country. Geniuses. I love Candace Owens.
oppressions that people can live in?
That's one thing. My wife is Vietnamese, so her parents are from Vietnam, and they ran away from Marxism. They ran away from that, and they told me the stories. Her father basically came on a boat, and he would tell us, like, 9 out of 10 didn't make it. He was one of the 10 boats that did make it.
I wonder what they were fleeing. I wonder what those Vietnamese people were fleeing. Was it communism, or was it the United States dropping bombs on their schools and on their agriculture and dropping tons and tons of napalm and Agent Orange on Vietnam that made it hard for them to grow food to this day? Dropping bombs on the Cambodian people to where Anthony Bourdain said if you ever see Henry Kissinger, if after you visit Cambodia and talk to the people and see what the U.S. did to them, you will never stop wanting to beat Henry Kissinger to death with your bare hands. Henry Kissinger being the U.S. Secretary of State at the time, who helped do the Vietnam War and the bombings of Cambodia. So you're talking here about how evil communism is and how evil Marxism is, and go watch Luna Oi if you want to see more about Vietnamese communism. Of course, she's a communist from Vietnam who makes incredible YouTube videos. He's talking about how evil Marxism is, that's given them a stable country, when he's living in the country and promoting the country that tried to wipe out Vietnam, that dropped napalm on Vietnam, that massacred Vietnamese civilians countless times. So it's so ridiculous, right? People fled Vietnam during the Vietnam War, therefore Marxism is bad. It was the capitalist country who invaded and destroyed their agriculture with bombs. So don't tell me Marxism is bad when your alternative for a system is a system that exploits countries in the global south for resources by bombing them into submission.
So there's that. And then the stories her mom would tell me about how they got out of the house last minute if they had stayed in.
Yes, and someone brings up a good point. Vietnam was a freaking colony before Ho Chi Minh. It was immediately after their War of Independence against the French that the U.S. invaded them and tried to kill all their people. So what you're advocating against is their independence and their self-determination, and you're saying, oh, I feel so bad for these people who suffer under communism. Meanwhile, you're in the country that dropped tons and tons of napalm and Agent Orange on this country after they expelled the French, who had robbed them of their resources and enslaved their people for years. It's like the complete opposite reality that these people live in.
An extra day, they would be in a camp, or they'd be in prison, or whatever it was. So I hear those stories. And then in my country, the Ayatollah came and they promised.
That's my favorite. People are going to end up in a camp or a prison. 23% of the world's prison population is here in the U.S. We have way more prisoners than Vietnam. And we allow slave labor. It's in the Constitution. It's in the 13th Amendment. You're allowed to have a slave as long as they've been convicted of a crime. And we pay prison labor less than $1 an hour. And you're like, oh no, Vietnam and Marxist countries have prison camps. What do you call the prison industrial complex here in America? Oh yeah, you don't pay attention to it. You just throw shade at China and talk all this nonsense about how the U.S. is the land of the free because someone told you so.
All these free things. And they said, just let us take over and we're going to do all this stuff for you. And they made the government God. And it's the same, it's no different. It's Marxist ideology. You make government number one and people give up their rights. And from there, we're going to have vast improvement and prosperity and all that. And that.
No, it's not the same as Marxist ideology. And if you knew about the Islamic Revolution, I mean, I'm sure he does know a little bit about the Islamic Revolution, but if you knew anything about political theory, you would know it's very different, right? Communists are very critical of Iran and in Iran, right? The Iranian communists do not think the Ayatollah is a Marxist form of government. And Iran says themselves, we are neither capitalist nor socialist. We are an Islamic government. All right, that is the economic system that we have. Okay, you can disagree with that, and I would have critiques of that myself, but don't act like it's Marxist. It's not. It's not a theocracy, but it's definitely not Marxist, right? It's not capitalist either. It's a specific form of government. It's an Islamic form of government. It's very different. There's no attempted transition to communism. There's no transitionary state through socialism. Like he said, it was the Ayatollah and the religious clergy who kind of took power from the Shah and the U.S.-backed monarchy. And of course, he's not mentioning that this only happened because in 1952, when there was a sort of left-leaning nationalist leader who was more like an actual communist, the U.S. overthrew him and put in power a monarchical leader.
It never comes because people don't realize the people who fight capitalism right now, and they say, oh, this big corporation, this big corporation has a little bit of power, because at the end of the day.
How? How do big corporations have a little bit of power? Without big corporation, the UFC is a big corporation, one, and without big corporations, you wouldn't have this platform to talk. Look up how many big corporations fund Candace Owens' show. How do big corporations not have that much power? Big corporations own everything. You know, big corporations own the government. 93% of elections are decided by the person who raises the most money. So they own our political system. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, and the media is owned by corporations. The food we eat is owned by corporations. Cars, transportation is owned by corporations. The way that we fuel those cars, fossil fuels, are owned by corporations. And they only have the incentive of profit, not of taking care of people. So if this shows perfectly the American mindset around this. Because corporations are private entities, and because it's written into the Constitution that private equals freedom, that means corporations only have a little amount of power in their heads. When you look in reality, it's the opposite. I mean, how can anybody realistically look at the United States today and say corporations just have this little bit of power, but just wait till the government gets control because they'll have way more power? It's like, no. The government is controlled by the corporations.
Yeah, you could say, I'm not going to buy from you. And so you kill its power. The government, once it takes power, nobody takes that away. You don't take it. If it's gained freely, it'll be taken back in blood. That's the only way you get away from communism, Marxism.
Wow, say it again, that sentence. If it's gained freely, it will be taken.
The only way you're going to get it back is in blood. And it's been over and over. It's proven. That's historical. You can see it in history.
It is such...
All right, that's probably enough of this. It's historical. You can see it. Well, you know, and I mean that this is the lie that's propped up, right? This is why billionaires spend so much money funding Candace Owens, right? This is why Candace Owens has Beneil Dariush on her show, and she doesn't have Weili Zhang on her show, right? When Weili Zhang, when Rose Namajunas told Weili Zhang, the communist fighter, better dead than red, and Weili Zhang said, oh, why don't you come to China and see it for yourself? Nobody reported on that, right? They weren't saying, oh, Weili Zhang says, come visit China, where the people have been raised from poverty. 90% of the people support the Communist Party. And you know, this isn't to say the Chinese government is perfect and they've done nothing wrong. But you see the assumption of Americans that this is just evil. It is absolutely evil and horrible, and we don't care what anybody who's actually from there says. We only care about the people who moved to America after they had revolutions, you know, similar to like Cuba, where the plantation owners moved to America after the revolution took their slaves. Like, those are the only people we can listen to, right? When it's like, why don't you actually have Weili Zhang on your show, and why don't you talk to her about China? She probably has way more substantive critiques of the government than you guys, because you have no idea what their government's actually like, because you live in a comic book fantasy world propagated by the U.S. ruling class, where anything that shifts power into the hands of the workers is bad, evil, not good, needs to be paid for in blood. All I have to do is say, this is proven historically, and that's it, because everyone in America just accepts that communism is bad. It's completely ridiculous, and this is why Candace Owens is funded this way, and I'm not going to fight Beneil Dariush. He would kick the crap out of me. Please stop telling me to do that, but yeah, there's my reaction to his on Candace Owens' show.